Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving deep into bail under India's NDPS Act today.
The Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985.
Yeah, that one.
It's a mouthful.
It is, but it's super important because it tries to do this balancing act
Right.
of cracking down on drug offenses, but also making sure individual rights are protected.
It's a tough one.
It is.
It's real balancing act.
And we've got some incredible research from Shivam Shukla
Advocate.
right on this really fascinating and complex area of law. So
Absolutely.
let's just jump right in.
Yeah.
So the stakes are obviously incredibly high here. We're talking about someone's freedom.
Absolutely. The stakes couldn't be higher. And even the tiniest details
Right.
can have huge implications.
Like what kind of tiny details are we talking?
Well, even something like, the amount of a substance
Oh, wow.
can completely change the game.
Okay, so help me understand this from the beginning.
Yeah.
What's the main purpose of the NDPS Act, and why is it considered so much stricter than other laws in India?
Yeah, so basically the NDPS Act is India's weapon against drug trafficking and abuse.
Okay.
It covers, everything.
Everything.
From cultivation and production to possession, sale, transportation, and even consumption
Wow.
of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances.
Okay.
And it's strict because it's meant to really deter people
Yeah.
from engaging in these activities.
Sending a strong message.
Strong message. Yeah, drug offenses are not taken lightly at all.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does that play out in practice, especially when we're talking about getting bail?
Right. Well, the NDPS Act has some really unique provisions that make getting bail particularly difficult.
Okay.
So, for example, Section 37 lays out these specific limitations on granting bail, especially when it comes to offenses involving what they call commercial quantities of drugs.
Commercial quantities. Now, that sounds serious.
Right.
Can you give me a specific example of what that means?
Sure, yeah. So let's take heroin, for instance.
Okay.
Possessing just 1 gram is considered a small quantity. But anything over 250 grams is classified as a commercial quantity.
Okay.
So suddenly we're not just talking about personal use.
Right.
The law presumes an intent to traffic.
Wow, 250 grams. That doesn't seem like that much.
Right. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm guessing once you hit that commercial quantity, your chances of getting bail go
way down.
way down.
That changes the whole game.
So the NDPS Act kind of flips the script on that usual innocent until proven guilty thing.
Exactly.
Instead, there's this concept.
This concept called the presumption of culpable mental state.
Wait, so you're presumed guilty unless you can prove you're innocent?
Essentially, yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, it basically means the law just assumes you had the intention to commit the crime.
Oh, wow.
The mens reas, unless you can prove otherwise.
Okay.
And that puts the defense at a huge disadvantage right from the start.
It sounds like an uphill battle, for sure.
Yeah, it is a massive uphill battle.
So under the NDPS Act, the burden of proof shifts to the defendant. That's intense.
It is. And Section 54 of the NDPS Act actually deals specifically with this reverse burden of proof.
Okay.
So imagine you're trying to prove you didn't intend to commit a crime when the law already assumes you did.
Right.
It's a nightmare for defense lawyers.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But what about time limits? How long can someone be held before they even get a chance to argue for bail?
Right. That's a good question. That's where the Criminal Procedure Code, the CRPC, comes in.
Okay.
Section 167 sets a time limit of 180 days for investigations in NDPS cases.
Okay.
But
there's always a but.
There's always a but. It can be extended to a year.
A year.
With valid reasons.
Okay.
However, if charges aren't filed within that time frame, the accused might be eligible for what's called default bail.
Default bail. Is that like a get-out-of-jail-free card?
Not quite. It basically means that you're entitled to be released if the investigation drags on too long.
Okay.
It's a safeguard against indefinite detention without charges. But it's not a guaranteed release. The prosecution can still try to oppose it.
Okay, so there's a glimmer of hope.
A glimmer of hope.
But it's not a slam dunk.
It's definitely not a slam dunk.
Okay, so we've talked about presumptions and time limits.
Yeah.
But I'm still curious about those drug quantity classifications.
Right.
How does the NDPS Act actually determine those thresholds? Are they just like random numbers, or is there a method to the madness?
Yeah, well, the central government sets these thresholds for different substances.
Okay.
And they consider a bunch of factors like the drug's potency, its potential for abuse, and its prevalence in the illicit market.
So it's not just...
So yeah, it's not random.
Okay.
There's a rationale behind it.
So for example, we talked about that 250-gram threshold for heroin being classified as a commercial quantity.
Right.
Is there like a similar breakdown for other common substances?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take hashish, for example.
Okay.
The threshold for a small quantity is 5 grams,
Okay.
while a commercial quantity starts at 1 kilogram.
Wow.
Big difference.
Yeah, and you can see how those classifications
Right.
would make a huge difference
Huge difference.
in how a case is handled.
Absolutely.
So the type of drug and the amount involved can drastically change the course of a case,
Right.
especially when it comes to bail. But I'm guessing it's not always so black and white.
You're right. It's rarely straightforward.
Right.
There are tons of cases where the lines get blurred,
Yeah.
and that's where things get even more complex.
Okay, so let's get into some real-world examples then.
Let's do it.
What are some cases that have really shaped how we understand bail under the NDPS Act?
Okay, well, there are a lot, but let's start with a big one. The State of Kerala v. Rajesh case from 2020.
Okay.
This Supreme Court judgment really emphasized the strict conditions for bail under the NDPS Act.
Okay.
They basically said to grant bail, the court needs to be absolutely convinced
Oh, wow.
that the accused is not guilty and won't commit any more crimes while out on bail.
So that's a pretty high bar
Very high bar.
for anyone hoping to get bail.
Extremely high.
Okay, and then there's the Union of India v. Pratik Shukla case from the following year.
Right.
The Supreme Court again reiterated that.
They doubled down
Yeah.
when it comes to offenses involving those large commercial quantities of drugs.
Right.
Those conditions laid out in Section 37 are non-negotiable.
You have to meet them.
You have to meet them to even have a shot at bail.
Okay, so in those cases, the courts really double down
Yeah.
on the strictness of the NDPS Act.
Absolutely.
But I'm guessing there have also been cases where the courts have been a little more lenient.
Of course there have.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Aryan Khan case from 2021.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this one got a lot of media
I
attention,
remember that.
and for good reason.
Yeah.
Aryan Khan.
Son of Bollywood superstar Shah Rukh Khan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was arrested on drug charges during a raid on a cruise ship.
I remember it was all over the news. So what happened with his bail?
Well, the Bombay High Court ultimately granted him bail,
Okay.
but it wasn't a simple decision. The court really scrutinized the evidence
Yeah.
and found that it wasn't enough to prove that he was personally in possession of drugs or involved in any conspiracy.
So even in a high-profile case like that the courts were willing to look beyond the initial charges
Yes,
and really dig into the specifics.
absolutely. It was a very important case because it shows how the courts are trying to find that balance
Right.
between upholding the strictness of the NDPS Act and making sure individual rights are protected.
Right. It's not just about applying the law blindly.
Exactly.
It's about ensuring fairness and due process.
Absolutely.
These cases really highlight how complex this area of law can be.
It's very complex.
But they also make me realize how easily things can go wrong, especially during those initial searches and seizures.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if the police don't follow the rules during those crucial early stages?
That's a great question, and it's a very important one.
Yeah.
The NDPS Act actually has very specific procedures to protect the rights of the accused during searches and seizures.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about doing it by the book.
Exactly. It has to be by the book.
Okay.
Every step of the way.
So let's take a deep dive then into sections 42 and 50 of the NDPS Act,
Okay.
which I understand are all about these procedures.
Right. So Section 42 mandates that officers have to document everything
Okay.
meticulously.
Wow.
Like all the information they've received about a potential offense.
Okay.
And they can only conduct searches during specific hours,
Okay.
like between sunrise and sunset, unless there are truly exceptional circumstances.
So they can't just barge in anytime.
No, they can't.
There are rules.
There are very specific rules.
Okay.
And then there's Section 50, which is all about informed consent.
Okay.
This section clearly states that before conducting a search, officers have to inform the accused of their right to have the search witnessed by either a magistrate or a gazetted officer.
Okay.
If they don't do this, the search could be considered illegal.
And if the search is deemed illegal, then what happens to the evidence they collect?
It could be thrown out,
Wow.
which could significantly weaken the prosecution's case.
And that could have a major impact on bail.
Absolutely, a major impact.
So basically, the NDPS Act has these built-in safeguards
Right.
to prevent abuse of power and protect individual rights, even in these cases involving drug offenses.
That's the idea.
And it's not just about theoretical rights. These safeguards actually play out in real-life cases all the time.
All the time.
If you look at those judgments we were just discussing,
Yeah.
you'll see that courts are increasingly sensitive to any procedural lapses during searches and seizures.
Yeah, they're really paying attention to that.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of disheartening to think that someone could be caught in the system even if they're innocent or if the evidence against them is shaky.
Right.
Are there any situations where the courts are more willing to grant bail even with all these stringent conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Okay, good.
While the NDPS Act is notoriously tough.
There are a few rays of hope.
Okay, let's shed some light on those exceptions.
Let's do it.
What are some circumstances where bail might be granted?
All right, so one major exception is medical grounds.
Okay.
If the accused is seriously ill or needs urgent medical attention, the courts have shown they're willing to prioritize their health and well-being.
Okay, so the right to health can sometimes trump the strictness of the NDPS Act.
Sometimes it can.
Yeah.
It's all about balancing those competing interests, right?
Right.
And it's not just about physical health either.
Okay.
Courts have also considered mental health.
Right.
And the risk of harm in detention.
That makes sense. What about situations where the accused is actually struggling with addiction?
Right.
Does that ever factor into bail decisions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The courts are increasingly recognizing that addiction is a complex issue
Yeah.
that often requires treatment and rehabilitation.
Not just punishment.
Not just punishment, exactly.
So if the accused is genuinely seeking help for their addiction, that can significantly increase their chances of getting bail.
It seems like there's a growing understanding that just locking people up
Right.
isn't always the best solution,
It's not.
especially when it comes to drug offenses.
Right.
There are all these underlying issues that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. We're seeing a shift towards a more nuanced approach.
Yeah.
One that recognizes the need for both accountability and compassion.
This is also encouraging, but what about young people who get caught up in the system? Are there any special considerations for them?
Yeah, you're talking about juvenile offenders.
Yeah.
And yes, they're treated quite differently under the law.
Okay.
When it comes to minors, the focus shifts from punishment to rehabilitation and reintegration.
Okay.
They're dealt with under the Juvenile Justice Act, which generally leads to more lenient bail provisions.
So even though the NDPS Act is designed to be tough on drug offenses, there are situations where the courts are willing to take a step back and consider the individual circumstances of each case,
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to protecting the vulnerable.
Absolutely, they have to.
Wow, we've covered so much ground already.
We have.
We've learned about the strictness of the NDPS Act, those complex bail provisions, the importance of procedural safeguards, and even those glimmers of hope in certain circumstances.
We've laid a good foundation.
Yeah, we have, but I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface, right?
Oh, we've only just begun.
Well, I am definitely ready for part 2 of this deep dive.
Me too.
I'm already hooked.
It gets even more interesting.
Oh, I can't wait.
Stay tuned.
All right.
We'll be right back after the break.
Welcome back to the deep dive, picking up right where we left off.
I'm ready for more.
Last time we talked about how tricky bail can be
Yeah.
under India's NDPS Act.
It's intense.
But now let's get into the real-world scenarios.
Okay, let's do it.
What happens when someone is actually arrested
Right.
under this law?
Yeah, what are their options? Well, you're facing those presumptions of guilt.
Right.
The burden of proof is on you.
Yeah.
And there's a real possibility of a long time behind bars.
Okay.
So a good defense lawyer is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so they get a lawyer, then what can the lawyer actually do to help?
Okay, well, a skilled defense lawyer is like a detective.
Oh, okay.
They're going to scrutinize the evidence, look for any inconsistencies or gaps in the prosecution's case.
Okay.
They're going to challenge the prosecution's arguments.
Right.
And most importantly, they're going to make sure the police followed every single rule during the search and seizure.
Okay, so those procedural safeguards we talked about earlier,
Yes.
they become really important at this stage.
They are essential. Remember those sections in the NDPS Act that lay out the proper procedures for search and seizure.
Right, right.
If the police made even a small mistake, a good defense lawyer will seize that opportunity.
Okay, so, for example, if the police didn't inform the accused of their right to have a witness present during a search, could that really make a difference?
It could be a game changer.
Wow.
The defense lawyer could argue that the evidence they got during that search
Right.
was inadmissible,
Oh, okay.
which could weaken the prosecution's case significantly.
And if the evidence is thrown out, does that increase the chances of getting bail?
Absolutely. Without strong evidence, the prosecution's case is much weaker.
Right.
And the judge might be more inclined to grant bail.
Okay, so those safeguards are there for a reason.
They are crucial for protecting the rights of the accused.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. These safeguards help ensure a fair process.
This is all so insightful, but I'm also realizing how complicated and nuanced this area of law is.
It's like a legal chess game.
Yeah.
Where every move matters.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they do if they ever find themselves in a situation involving the NDPS Act?
Don't panic.
Okay.
First and foremost.
Okay.
Yes, the law is strict,
Yeah.
but it's not insurmountable.
Yeah.
The most important thing,
Get a good lawyer.
get a good lawyer.
Someone who knows the NDPS Act like the back of their hand.
Exactly, someone who can really fight for their rights.
Then remember those procedural safeguards?
Yes.
They're there for a reason.
They are powerful tools
Okay.
for the defense.
So we've talked about the role of the defense lawyer, those crucial procedural safeguards,
Right.
and the importance of staying calm and informed.
Yes.
But let's get back to those real-world scenarios for a moment.
Okay.
Can you give me some specific examples of how those procedural safeguards might play out in a real case?
Sure, let's say the police get a tip-off
Okay.
about someone allegedly possessing drugs.
Okay.
They can't just barge into that person's home.
Right.
Without a warrant. They have to follow a specific procedure,
Okay.
document everything carefully, and make sure they are acting within the bounds of the law.
So there's a clear process
Very clear process.
they have to follow to ensure a lawful search.
Absolutely. And if they don't follow that process,
Right.
if they cut corners or overstep their authority,
Right.
that could be grounds for challenging the legality of the search.
And if the search is deemed illegal, what happens to the case?
Well, the evidence they found during that search might be inadmissible in court,
Okay.
which could really damage the prosecution's case
Yeah.
and potentially lead to the charges being dropped altogether.
Wow, that's a pretty significant consequence for not following the rules.
It is, and that's why those safeguards are so important.
Right.
They protect the rights of individuals
Yeah.
and ensure that law enforcement is acting responsibly within the confines of the law.
These examples really bring those procedural safeguards to life.
I'm glad.
It's fascinating to see how these seemingly small details can have such a huge impact on the case.
It's all about ensuring a fair and just process.
Right.
These safeguards are in place to prevent the abuse of power
Okay.
and ensure that everyone's rights are protected.
Even in these cases?
Even in these cases.
It's clear that having a strong understanding of these safeguards
Yes.
and how they work is crucial
Absolutely crucial.
for anyone facing charges under the NDPS Act.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And in this case, it can be the key to protecting your freedom.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the practical aspects of bail.
Right.
Under India's NDPS Act, we've explored the role of defense lawyers,
Yes.
those crucial procedural safeguards,
Right.
and how these real-life scenarios can actually play out.
Absolutely.
But our journey isn't over yet.
Not quite.
There's still more to uncover.
Definitely.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about all the ins and outs of bail under India's NDPS Act.
See, it's been quite a journey.
It has. We've covered the strictness of the law, those tough bail provisions, the importance of those procedural safeguards during searches,
Right.
and even real-world examples of how those safeguards actually come into play.
Yeah, we've seen how those small details can make a big difference.
They really can. But now I'm curious, what does the future hold for this area of law?
That's a great question.
Is it all doom and gloom, or are there signs of progress and potential reform?
It's definitely not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
The NDPS Act isn't set in stone, it's
Right.
constantly evolving,
Right.
shaped by court judgments, societal shifts,
Okay.
and discussions about how to best address drug offenses.
So there's hope.
There's definitely hope. There are some exciting trends and potential reforms on the horizon.
Okay, I'm ready for a glimpse into the future.
Right.
What kind of trends are you seeing that give you hope for positive change?
Well, one major trend is this growing recognition of the need to really differentiate between drug addicts and drug traffickers.
Okay.
For a long time, the law treated everyone caught with drugs pretty much the same,
Right.
regardless of their level of involvement.
Right. It was kind of a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. But we're starting to see that shift.
Yeah, we talked about how that's starting to change, especially with those exceptions for rehabilitation.
Right.
And the courts considering individual circumstances.
Exactly. There's a growing understanding that addiction is a complex health issue.
Yeah.
It often requires treatment and support, not just punishment.
Right.
And this is fueling a movement to actually amend the NDPS Act to
Oh.
take a more nuanced approach.
Okay, so how would that work in practice? What kind of changes are being proposed?
Well, one key proposal is to amend the law to clearly distinguish between possession for personal use
Okay.
and possession with the intent to traffic.
Right, so you're separating those who are struggling with addiction
Exactly.
from those who are actually running these big drug operations.
Precisely that way, people caught with smaller amounts,
Right.
especially first-time offenders,
Right.
wouldn't automatically face those same harsh penalties.
Okay. Yeah, that seems much more reasonable.
It is, and this shift in perspective is already starting to influence bail decisions.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, more and more courts are actually factoring in the individual circumstances of the accused,
Okay.
particularly if they are actively seeking treatment for their addiction.
So there's hope that rehabilitation will be prioritized, not just punishment.
Absolutely, and that brings us to another significant trend, the focus on reducing the strain on under-trial prisoners.
Right, because we talked about how those strict bail conditions under the NDPS Act can lead to these really lengthy pretrial detentions.
Right, sometimes even years before a case even goes to trial.
And we talked about the impact that can have not just on the individual, but on their families and communities.
It's devastating, so there's a real push for reforms to make bail more accessible,
Okay.
especially for cases involving smaller quantities or nonviolent offenses.
Okay.
This could involve easing the financial burden of bail
Okay.
or giving judges more discretion to grant bail based on the specifics of each case.
It's all about finding that balance
It is.
between ensuring public safety,
Right.
but also upholding individual rights.
It's a tough balance, but it's a necessary one.
It is, and it's a challenge that legal systems all over the world are facing. How do you create a system that's both effective at combating crime, but also fair to individuals?
Exactly. And I think we'll also start seeing changes driven by technology.
Oh, interesting.
You know, we're seeing a surge in virtual court hearings
Right,
and the use of electronic evidence.
right.
And these trends are only going to continue.
It's fascinating to think about how technology is going to shape the legal landscape.
It is. How could it impact bail decisions?
Mm.
Well, imagine if courts could access evidence more quickly,
Right.
more efficiently. That could speed up the bail process significantly.
That would be huge.
It would, and virtual hearings could make it easier for people to attend those bail hearings,
Yeah.
especially if they're being held somewhere far away.
Right.
It could make the system more streamlined,
Yeah.
more accessible.
Okay, so technology could really help move things in the right direction.
It has the potential, but we need to be mindful of potential biases
Right.
and make sure everyone has equal access to technology and to legal representation.
Right. We don't want to create a system where justice is only available to those who can afford it.
Exactly. Justice should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances.
Oh, we can't forget about the power of public awareness and advocacy.
Absolutely. The more people understand these issues, the
Yeah.
more likely we are to see meaningful reforms.
So this isn't just an issue for legal experts to tackle.
It's a societal issue.
Yeah.
It requires open dialogue, informed debates,
Right.
and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Create a more just system for everyone.
Exactly.
This has been such an incredible deep dive into the world of bail under India's NDPS Act.
It has.
We've explored the law's complexities, the challenges, the potential for a more balanced and humane approach.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and a huge thank you to Shivam Shukla, advocate, for giving us the research to make this deep dive possible.
Absolutely.
To our listeners, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep advocating for a more just world.
Couldn't agree more.
That's it for this deep dive. But join us next time as we explore another fascinating topic